It's my honor to introduce our speaker for this session, Joel Braunald. Joel is a close friend of mine from school, and also a quick story about how I got to know Joel, and then introduce his bio. Last year, a group of Israeli students at Harvard organized the first annual Harvard-Israel conference, which was at the time... Can you guys hear me in the back? Okay. So a group of Israeli students at Harvard organized the first ever Israel conference there, and it was the largest student-led conference on Israel on a North American campus. We had about 900 participants, and actually Catherine Henderson, our keynote for the afternoon, also spoke there. As part of the conference, we organized a peace competition in memory of my twin brother Avi, the idea being that we wanted to challenge people to think innovatively in the space of peacemaking and try to come up with new concepts of how to move forward to shape peace in the region with Israelis and Palestinians. We had a lot of really exciting and innovative submissions, some more interesting than others, and the winner was Joel's submission, and it was, he'll tell a little bit about the idea, but the prize was actually awarded by Dennis Ross, the American Special Envoy to the Middle East for many years, who perhaps knows this issue better than anybody else. And Dennis was so excited by Joel's idea that he spent his entire keynote at Harvard Kennedy School talking about the idea, and now he has added it to his 14-step plan to create peace between Israelis and Palestinians. So it's pretty exciting, and that's kind of how Joel and I became close friends, and we're really excited to have him here with us today in Santa Barbara. A little bit about Joel. Joel is a writer and a blogger. He writes for many publications, including Haaretz. He's a former employee, actually he now works for One Voice in New York, in charge of their strategic partnerships, and as well as working with them to create a project which involves his idea at the peace competition, which he'll tell you more about. He's an alumni of the Harvard Kennedy School, and is a senior fellow at the Alliance for Youth Movements, and holds honorary life memberships to both the National Union of Students and the Union of Jewish Students for his contributions to both of them. So please welcome Joel.
Thanks ever so much, and I'm from Brooklyn by way of London, which is somewhat of my accent, so it's marvellous to be here. I've had a wonderful Shabbat with Yav and with Arthur and with Catherine, and your community has been such a unique community, not just in its weather, but in sort of the attitude of the community towards Israel and other challenging topics. I'm going to speak to you for around 25 minutes, and then we're going to have a far more interactive sort of conversation. A little bit about me outside the bio, so you understand who I am and where I come from, and the movement I currently work for. So my name's Joel. I was born and bred in London. I was a B'nai Kiva boy, which is a religious Zionist youth movement. I spent 2 years in Yeshivat Chesder, which is an Israeli Army theological college for rabbinical school. I spent 2 years living in Jerusalem before going to university and getting deeply involved in the National Union of Students, which in the UK we believe in unions still. So I was one of the 27 students. I was one of the 27 students who ran the National Union of Students, and I was representing 10,000 Jewish students to the national body. Now I know you guys in the UC, in the University of California university system have some challenges. Please God, may what happened in the UK never happen to you, which is a real hostile campus environment. And I was working during Operation Cast Lead, the first war in Gaza, at securing Jewish student safety and facilitating a lot of this work. After which, I joined this marvelous movement, the One Voice movement. So just as a little bit of way of introduction, One Voice is a parallel working Israeli-Palestinian civil society movement that works to educate, empower, and mobilize the grassroots in both societies to get to a two-state solution through advocating to their leaders. So for the past 10 years, we've trained over 4,500 Israelis and Palestinians, Palestinians to Palestinians, Israelis to Israelis. We've interacted with over 650,000 people, and we've created 28 chapters across both societies. And we've got offices in New York and London that support the work we do in the region. And the movement I work for is very important, talking about how you have introduced me with the Avi Schaefer Peace Innovation Prize. And the thought behind it goes back to what I specialize in. So my speciality in life is understanding the role of civil society in regions of conflict. And my specific expertise is Israel-Palestine. So how do civil society, be they just people, businesses, not-for-profits, both within the region and outside the region, affect the conflict? And so, while I was at the Kennedy School, I was thinking very deeply about this and trying to analyse, currently at the moment, what is the major issue blocking peace? We all know sort of the different final status issues, be they Jerusalem, the settlements, be it issues of the right of return for Palestinian refugees, rockets coming from Gaza. But is there something overarching which is really currently blocking the parties from even doing anything? And having looked really fundamentally at it, I came out with that the diagnosis is what I like to call an incredulity gap. And what that means is that there's an utter lack of belief that even though the populations generally, according to polls, agree on what the possible outcome could look like, and those numbers are around 55% in the Palestinian society, around 65% in the Israeli society, that's been stable probably since 1993. There is no belief that Israelis or Palestinians will see this in their lifetime. And what's worse is that belief factor is worse amongst the young generation than amongst the old generation. There are multiple reasons for this legitimate lack of belief. And when I say belief, I'm using the word very carefully. A lot of people talk about trust. But you can't even get to trust about trusting the other side if you don't believe it's possible. So we're in this peculiar scenario where the populations, no one wants a two-state solution, but the populations are willing to accept a two-state solution, but no one believes we're ever going to get there. And understanding that helps you understand about how do you actually try and improve that situation. Because you can have as many negotiations as you want at the table. But if the populations don't believe it will ever lead anywhere, the politicians will never move forward. So, at the moment there's been a lot of focus about getting the negotiations back on track, now with President Obama and Secretary Kerry. But the important thing is when the negotiations do happen, that something actually can happen at the table. And preparing the societies to create a two-state reality. Now, the basis of the two-state solution is a concept of land for peace, which means that in exchange for land, the Israelis get peace. And what you're doing is you're trading a very tangible concept, land, for an intangible concept, peace. And what you've had for the past 20 years is each side offering the other what they don't want. So if you look at the Israelis, and President Shimon Peres being the ultimate example of this, he speaks a wonderful language about how a two-state solution can deliver a new Middle East, and talk about the want of the Israelis to have peace and the Israeli mentality of pushing for peace. But the ability to trade that for land in a negotiated setting has never happened. And since 1993 till 2013, you've seen an increase in settlements from 50,000 to 500,000 settlers. So the Palestinians who are looking for land are instead given an intangible concept of peace. And from the Israeli perspective, they're looking for this intangible concept of preparation, a culture of peace. So while they get amazing security cooperation from the PA since 2006 till 2013, and as you heard from the previous speaker, it's a period of weird calm currently within Israel, that a lot of things are under control when it comes to the West Bank. There's still this inability to give the Israelis what they want, which is this language, this understanding that we're going to live together, that we accept you, that we want you to be part of our neighborhood. So because there's been this mismatch, there hasn't been the ability to move forward. So when I was thinking about this, and this is when I get onto the submission I wrote for the Schaefer Prize, are there steps that can be taken that are within each society's own best interests that can help create a two-state solution rather than denigrate it, but are unilateral? So let me just unpack that statement for a bit. When Israel withdrew from Gaza and when it withdrew from Lebanon, both of those steps were unilateral withdrawals that fundamentally affected the land for peace dynamic. They gave land and expected peace, and in each time they weren't given peace. There were rockets from Lebanon, there were rockets from Gaza. So the key in understanding how we can start building a two-state reality today is looking at unilateral steps that each party can take, but don't touch the fundamental reality of land for peace at the moment. Because if you withdraw from land and don't get peace, you're killing the peace process. So are there steps that you can do in your own society that are unilateral, but don't currently happen to be withdrawing from a sector of land? So the topic that I looked at, and when I was in my time in yeshiva, was specifically what can you do for the settled community? In 2005, Israel withdrew 8,000 settlers from Gaza. And these people have gone through a lot. Even today, around 74% of that population have serious psychological issues. They're still struggling to find jobs and housing. And they were given incentives as individuals to move out of their houses. So the government said, if you leave your house in Gaza, we will give you $200,000. Not only was the money not forthcoming, but communities were broken up. So I started looking at it and said, look, even Benjamin Netanyahu, when he came to Congress, said that at least 30,000 people are going to have to move. So what can we do today to help that transition? What can we do to show the settler community that we're serious about supporting them, about moving them as communities and celebrating them as pioneers, but in the same way building for a future rather than for a continuation of the conflict? So I argued that Israel today needs to build in the Negev, which is the south of Israel, and the Golan, which is the north of Israel, empty communities. Just build empty houses, and when they're completed, give job incentives and move communities wholesale into these empty houses from the outlying settlements. And by doing that, you do 5 very key important things. The first is that you show the settlers you care about them, that you're preparing for something, that they are the ones who have to make these sacrifices for peace, and you're respecting them. You're moving them as a community. Secondly, you lengthen Israel's strategic depth. If you look in your Santa Barbara Israel packets at the different maps that you've got there, the majority of Israel's commercial and population live in what's called the coastal plain, which is the very thin bit next to the West Bank. That's where you've got Haifa, Netanya, Tel Aviv, Herzliya Patuah, all sort of the major population centers. By moving population more to the south and north, you lengthen Israel's strategic corridor and make it a far more likely scenario that they can defend against further attacks. Also, you rebalance the demographics in the north and south of the country, which are skewed towards having a higher majority of Palestinian Druze or Bedouin citizens of Israel, and you help move Jewish populations in without transferring minorities out. So in a very moral way, you can help make sure that you're not worried about rights of secession, about parts of the country leaving it, but keeping it in. And then lastly, and what I felt was very importantly, you signal to the Palestinians that you're serious about a two-state solution because you're building for tomorrow, you're not building to continue the settlement enterprise. And that you're putting your infrastructure to actually demonstrate your commitment for the two-state solution. So when I wrote this idea, I was very happy I was selected and that the idea was picked. And I was even more delighted that Ambassador Dennis Ross took the idea and ran with it. And it's now number 3 in his 14-point plan that he published in the New York Times. And I've since got to work with Ambassador Ross about how we actually sort of explore this. But my idea was one idea. And what I found after I left the Kennedy School, I went into a startup. I did something, instead of doing negotiations on the Middle East peace process, I did negotiations on renovations in New York City, which is in some ways harder. I was looking at negotiations between architects, interior designers, and contractors. And whatever, it was fun. But the president of the foundation gave me a call and said, Joel, we've read your idea, we really like it. Can you come up with more? And can you sit with us and help us come up with more and then try and implement them? So it was a big challenge, but something that was a really cool idea. Do you want to hit one side? So we decided at One Voice, if we're going to supplement the political process, as in add to it rather than replace it, what can we do to actually find more of these ideas outside of just a settler relocation, which by the way exists there? So what we did is we started looking in every societal sector, be they the environment, water, rehousing settlements, economic development, education, religion, Jerusalem, children and sports, and we started gathering different ideas that are scalable. So you start at a grassroots level over here, and then you get added local business support, then regional support, and then global support. So you have scalable facts on the ground, which are positive. The reason this is so essential is that regardless of what happens at the negotiation table, those who oppose a two-state solution are currently building towards a one-state. When President Obama came to the region, the Settlement Council, the Yesha Council, published a wonderful document called Yehuda v'Shomron, which is the biblical name for the West Bank, Jewish, Vital and Realistic. And it's a wonderful document, I urge you all to read it, it's 40 pages. And on the last page, they have the 9-step plan to achieve their vision. And it's very clear. Step 6, by the way, is convincing the international community that the two-state solution is impossible. Step 7 is getting 1 million Jews to make Aliyah to Israel. Step 8 is to get 1 million Jews to go and live in the West Bank. And step 9 is building infrastructure to solidify the vision of Greater Land of Israel. So those who are opposing those who wish to have a one-state solution in Israel are currently activating on the Israeli side. And on the Palestinian side, as you guys know, with the rockets coming in from Hamas, from threats from Hezbollah, there are a lot of actors who are very much struggling and trying to make sure that two states don't come about. So what are we in the two states community, if it's something you believe in, doing to actually create a movement? Doing something that we can give people something that they can realize and help, importantly, bridge this incredulity gap. So One Voice decided to do this huge mapping project, and it wasn't just us. We spoke to different think tanks, we spoke to government authorities, we spoke to the White House, we spoke to the Palestine Investment Fund, to the Economic Cooperation Fund and others, and we came up with these, and this is around 50, and I've got a list of around 100 that we can flip in and out. What you see in the green over here is stuff that One Voice at the moment is starting to pioneer on the next 18 months. So what we've been doing for the past 10 years is building the human infrastructure necessary for peace. But rather than just advocate, we want to start building. So in Israel, in the last Knesset, we formed the first ever caucus, cross-party caucus, lobby, as you say in America, for the two-state solution, which allowed MKs to meet with civil society actors who also support that, to suggest interesting legislation that can actually move that forward. So in the same way that you have lobbies in America, be that the NRA, AIPAC, religious lobbies go and lobby their congressmen, this is an ability for members of the Knesset to come together and look at that. So we've been reconstituting this with the new Israeli government, and if you want to find out more about the current Israeli government, Yoav is leading a session this afternoon on that. And we've been looking at how we can actually have innovative ideas that can start creating wedges between the people who reject the two-state and those who are on the right, who agree with the two-state but aren't really sure about how to get there. So what can we do? So we're looking at, for example, putting a mortgage warning on all settlement purchases, which basically says that if you buy a house in the settlement, it's fine, but be warned that the land that you're building on could be subject to negotiations. So if you're as a homeowner just about to put out a mortgage, is this something you want to do? Just be aware of what you're trying to do. It's just a fair thing. And by the way, it's really important, and it has to be fair to those who choose to live in the West Bank, that they're aware of that. It's not something that's unfair, it's something that's important. Another piece of legislation we're looking at is saying that the final status of Gaza in the West Bank can only be determined through bilateral negotiations with the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which is what the Oslo Accord said. But even if we don't think these things are going to pass, it's about getting people to make their commitment publicly. Because there's been too much of people saying they support a two-state solution, but not putting anything there. And by doing that, you toxify the concept and you make it further and further away. So that's what we're doing in Israel. Within the West Bank and within the occupied Palestinian territories, we're building the first ever Palestinian National Peace Force. We learned, as we saw, that the Zionist movement made the deserts bloom with the JNM. And when land which is in the West Bank, which will be part of a future Palestinian state, is zoned for settlement purchases, often Palestinians used to go and plant olive trees to try and show that they want to have this land. But the olive trees died because there's no infrastructure there to sort of sustain them. So what we're looking to do is find a piece of land which is not strategically or militarily important for the Israelis, but is symbolically important for the Palestinians in Area C, and build the first ever Palestinian National Peace Force to demonstrate both a non-violent act of resistance against the occupation, but fundamentally building a peace forest. What could be a bigger and more symbolic image than presenting to the Israelis an image of an olive forest? And the aim is that that scales up. So what starts at an olive forest and then is supported by various celebrities and dignitaries who come and plant trees, then goes to an export sort of product. And we have an export company called the Peaceworks LLC, which was sort of our business arm to start off with. And we create the exports of that products and export them to the market, and that money can then be driven back into different economic projects. And when you look at this, all of these projects get to scale up in different ways. So over here, so if we look at the children in sports, one of the wonderful different organizations out there is Seeds of Peace and Hand in Hand, which are two organizations that do wonderful work with Israeli and Palestinian children. So if we highlight and spotlight their work, and we've been working with a Jordanian charity to create sports camps for kids. We then build that up to a Get to Know Me video campaign where you have video switching between Israeli and Palestinian schools. And then imagine this. And this is sort of where I'm going to finish, and then we're going to have an interesting conversation, I'm sure. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that if we could get to peace, there's going to be all these economic benefits of peace. That, the world will open up, you can have wonderful relations with the different neighbors, all of this stuff happens. But when Israelis and Palestinians hear that, they don't believe it. There's no ability to craft what that means. So what we're asking people to do, be it philanthropists, be it state actors, is saying, look, as the Israelis and Palestinians make progress on the negotiations, make commitments of things you'll do. So that if the Israelis and Palestinians can agree on can agree on borders and security, then Saudi Arabia should open a trade office with Israel and create a fund to build Arab housing in East Jerusalem. If the Israelis and Palestinians can reach an agreement on water rights, then Gordon Sagel from Crate and Barrel, who we've been speaking to, can build furniture factories in early adopting communities to incentivize that cooperation. And the crazy one, which our founder loves and why I added it in, is in 1993, and in the height of the apartheid in South Africa, no one imagined that the World Cup could come to South Africa, as it did in 2004. Though no one could have believed it, but it happened. So if we went to the World Cup and said, look, we understand it's a competitive bid process, but if you could support 10 years after a peace deal, the World Cup being co-hosted by Israel and Palestine, and I can tell you Israelis and Palestinians are rabid soccer fans, if you could do that and you can actually show that there can be a different future and help people visualize what a future could be, can you make that commitment today? And that's the sort of work that we're doing to help try and build the two-state reality today. So I'd love to hear your comments, questions, suggestions, understandings, and have an open dialogue. So thank you very much. David.
Oh, you read. Good eyesight.
Thank you very much.
Before I ask my question, would it be okay if I ask you how old you are? You see me up.
I'm 27.
I see. So what I think I heard is that what Israel does is traumatize their own people psychologically by moving them out, and Palestinians force the two-state issue, and their side of it is they keep shooting missiles until they get their way. I mean, that's what I thought I heard, is that the idea, do you think if they get their own land, they're going to stop shooting missiles and hurting the Israelis? I mean, the reason I asked how old you are, you seem naive.
I think that's fair. I seem naive. I would say that it's my generation has to live in the conflict when your generation has passed on, and I think that our naivety and hope, as it showed in the Arab Spring, can change global public opinion quicker than sort of other people. But I'd say your point's very valid and very important in terms of, let's deal with the Israeli side first and I'll deal with the Palestinian. I think my solution is far more compassionate to settlers than to ask them to continue to be put out there while the entire world attacks them as obstacles to peace. I think building for a future where you can move as an entire community, so you can keep your kids in the same kitta, in the same classroom, so you can have that communal support. And this isn't me saying this. Benjamin Netanyahu believes that some settlements have to be withdrawn. So I'm saying build the reality today. Why wait? Why spend more money pouring in? Now, on the Palestinian side, I don't think I said at any point Palestinians should continue firing rockets. But what I would say is that the Palestinian commitment is important that, and, all right, let's go back. Salman Fayyad, who's just resigned as the Palestinian Prime Minister, created something called state building in Palestine. And for the first time, Palestinians, instead of just waiting for the occupation to end, decided to start building a Palestinian state. The work that we're doing is saying continue building that Palestinian state as an act of resistance. If your act of resistance is building your own society, what could be better than that? That's learning from Ben-Gurion. And when he put out his plan in 2008, the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, no left-wing think tank in Jerusalem, came out and said this is the best idea we've ever seen. So the argument goes that you need to attach your civic protest to actual state building, because if you do one without the other, one becomes toxified. So that's what I'd say. I think that your criticisms are fair, and my naivety aside, I'd say that if we don't think we can ever change our situation or our power, we're just pawns to the situations around us. And Zionism's concept behind it was that the Jewish people could take control of their own fate. I believe that we have a responsibility not just to give in, but to try and do something.
But if they can't even make their own olive trees grow, I mean, maybe, I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, we could, if we, yeah. Moshe?
So, embedded in the Jewish history and DNA is that of being displaced.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the big issues that I've understood is that this is now embedded in the Palestinian consciousness and history. And it seems to me that, well, maybe I'll just ask the question, do you think that the creation of these settlements and moving Israelis into settlements with the anticipation that they're ultimately going to have to be displaced again, is part of this grander psychological scheme, as it were, to bring people on equal footing. So, and also, if we don't destroy the settlements when we move out, we have actually done what you were contemplating, is building that which they will need to not have to start from scratch.
I think it's a fascinating point. I think that with, there's lots of different think tank ideas about what you do with the assets that are left behind. And one of the key things about why this can't be done in a unilateral way, in terms of an actual withdrawal from the West Bank, is because what happened in Gaza would happen again, and you'd find rockets falling on Lod. And because you've rewarded extremism. If it's not done in a negotiated framework, if it is done in a negotiated framework, instead of burning down the greenhouses of Gaza, you could help renovate sort of the houses and have an exchange in terms of a property exchange where the funds that are used to sell former settler houses to Palestinian low income can be used to actually rebuild other settler houses. But your first point I found fascinating, that in the Jewish experience in terms of constantly moving and renovating, I think something very important. There were different reasons why settlements were created in the West Bank. The ones in the Jordan Valley were created there for security purposes. And what's very interesting is if you do a survey of different settlers, the settlers in the Jordan Valley are the least ideological, most willing to move settlers. There are other parts of the West Bank where settlers went because they were there before 1948, and that's often the Gush Etzion region. And in those settlers, they're like, if at the end of the day we'd have to move to guarantee a peace deal, we'd move, but in general we're seen as in with one of the settlement blocks, which is one of these traditional blocks which will go. And then the third category are settlers who move there because they have a greater land of Israel vision that's important where they go. I think the Jewish experience sort of, early Zionism worked, and Yoav taught me this weekend, by establishing settlements and pushing the bounds of international law, and that's how we got a state of Israel. And that was very important. And the challenge then became there was a flipping moment where the state of Israel was established, but the settlement enterprise continued. So then when does it flip back? When does the settlement project actually endanger the actual, in biblical, the club? When does it endanger sort of the majority of the body? And I think it's an interesting question. There's no easy answers. I can't see your name, so. Beth.
A few years back, I can't remember the organization, they came here and they showed, like during Yom Ha'atzmaut, the Arabs having a huge military celebration at the same day, and it's so hard to get people's opinions to transfer. You can't just sign a peace agreement and say, okay, from now on there's going to be peace. It's not going to work. So recently there was a great movie from Chile called No, and how they did an enormous media campaign to convince people that yes, there can be a different way, and that wouldn't it be advised, wouldn't it be great if they could start something like that now to start changing people's opinions? Israel's map is not even on the Arab maps. You can't just automatically sign something and say.
I fully agree. And the aim of the programs that One Voice has been doing for 10 years, and our new program, is specifically about you need to build the human infrastructure necessary for peace. In 1993, when a peace accord was negotiated between Yasser Arafat and Rabin and the Oslo Accords, the challenge is that this was dealing with people's sacred issues. That was Jerusalem, the right of return. If you don't have the ability to bring your populations along with you, it will fail. Peace has to grow. It has to grow in a concept. And the challenge is for 20 years there's been a process and no peace. And you can play the blame game about, and there's plenty of blame to go around, do not get me wrong. But you need to start doing this sort of work as a matter of urgency. What I would say in terms of about the Israeli maps, yes, it's a big issue, and people have to recognize the reality that they're going to live in. But I'd also say that Palestinians don't need to become Zionists, and that's something very important to realize. To live at peace with one another, you need to accept the humanity of the other side and have a commitment to your own betterment and have a sense of dignity. That doesn't mean you need to accept the narrative of the other side. So when it comes to Yom Ha'atzmaut, which is, as a Zionist, is something I celebrate as the re-establishment of the State of Israel, and I'm a religious Zionist, I believe this in a biblical sense as well. For the Palestinians, it's called the Nakba Day, the day of catastrophe. It was the day that they lost their homes. Those two things, and why I disagree with a binational state and a one state, those are two narratives that will never meet. There's no ability to say that Nakba and Yom Ha'atzmaut can meet. But you can say that if you have your own states, you can celebrate them in your own ways and live alongside each other. I think that what's important to say is that we don't need people to want a two-state solution. We need people to be willing to accept a two-state solution. And that you don't have to compromise on your dreams, but you need to compromise on your reality. I think that's an important message for the Palestinians and for us. I believe in my right of return to Hebron. It's my second holiest city. But I'm willing to give it up to make sure that I can live in Israel. And so to a lot of Palestinians, believe fully and will never give up their right of return to Ramla, which is in mainland Israel, or Yafo. But the question is, what are you willing to accept to live in peace? Yeah.
How important in this overall picture is the education of children, especially females?
Interestingly, especially females. I'd say both are very important. I'll do the first one first and the second one second. So on the first one, education of children is vitally important, and I'm going to point you guys to a study that came out in February. So, as often, one of the big issues in the conflict is incitement, of educators educating to incite to hatred. And it was a huge issue in the Palestinian Authority for years. So there's always been a political argument. Have the school textbooks got better? Have they got worse? So the State Department originally funded a study by a wonderful professor out of Yale, and it went for, I think it was 8 years, analysing every single textbook in UNRWA, which is a UN school system, and the Palestinian authorities, and the 3 different educational institutions in Israel, which is the secular, the religious, and the Arab educational institutions, and looked in the educational books to what extent are people inciting and other parts. And they came out with this study, and they ranked the textbooks in terms of what was the best and what was the worst. The most important thing is that no one fell below the threshold. That while incitement used to be a tremendous issue, on a day-to-day educational issue, the level of incitement has dropped significantly. It's not perfect, but it's dropped. The Israeli secular school textbooks were the best. The Israeli religious school textbooks were the median. The Palestinian school textbooks were the 3rd best. So yes, there's still a ways to go. When it comes to women, One Voice has actually just launched a Women's of Influence project, specifically working with empowering females across the West Bank, and specifically with communities not affected by the conflict, be they Muslim, conservative organizations. I would say that in Israel, as we're seeing firsthand, that is it 26 MKs of women this year? 27 MKs of women, so I think there's a real positive thing there. And what I'd say about the Palestinian society is that nationalism in Palestine has traditionally been a secular ideology, which has allowed women to rise to the forefront. So people like Hanan Ashrawi and other people who are really prominent Palestinian female activists. One of the biggest challenges of Hamas is this Islamist ideology, which denigrates and segregates women in a specific way, in terms of if you're a liberal progressive. So, one of the challenges is making sure that women are educated, but I think that actually in Israel and Palestine that's less of a challenge than other parts of the region. Yes, Mark.
Yeah, so this is very refreshing, and congratulations.
Sure.
We hear in the media that the ultra-Orthodox population in Israel is growing faster than the more secular population. And do you see bringing them, making them believe in this, or do you see this as a competition?
It's a fascinating question, and even more fascinating because of what happened in the elections. So the ultra-Orthodox population in Israel is currently, by 2023, 1 in 3 Jewish children in Israel will be ultra-Orthodox. Just so that you guys recognize what the demographics are. So 1 in 3, and if the Jewish population is 6.3 and the other population is 1.7, 20% of the entire country will be ultra-Orthodox by 2023. So that's a reality. The challenges of ultra-Orthodox integration, before we go to the peace process, because it's a very big, people talk about the demographic challenges in terms of Palestinian. The real demographic challenge in Israel is the ultra-Orthodox demographic challenge, because you have a third of the country who struggles to contribute to the economy, doesn't contribute to the army, and educates people in a way that isn't conducive with being part of a modern global economy in terms of math and education and science. So in this latest election, the settler party, Chabad Yehudi, and the main moderate, the centrist party, Yesh Atid, bonded together to force the ultra-Orthodox out of the government. And the ultra-Orthodox were very unhappy about this. So the ultra-Orthodox are now out of the government, and because of that there are big reforms and pushes both in the education sector and within the army sector. But what's very interesting is that this has opened opportunity to add the ultra-Orthodox back into the peace camp in terms of on Israel-Palestine. And why do I say that? Ovadia Yosef, who is the spiritual head of Shas, which is one of the two major ultra-Orthodox parties, famously said that land for peace is kosher. It's a halakhically permissible concept. He doesn't know when the Palestinians will get to the point where he thinks it will create peace, but it's okay. And traditionally Shas supported the Oslo Accords. There was an opportunity to bring Shas and some parts of the Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox back into the peace camp, especially if they feel their own interests are being underrun. We at the moment are looking and exploring into that. We did have Shas and Ks in the caucus for the two-state solution, and the community is by no way monolithic. There are shifts in the community in terms of how much they associate with feeling that where they live is more important than how they live, and it's not a monolithic community in any way, shape or form. But traditionally, peace and security is not their number one issue, and thus they're willing to accept a two-state solution in more ways than the national religious are, which is a far more hawkish right-wing community. Yes, Deirdre.
Well, I have to say that this is the first time I felt hopeful.
Can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
And
Did you say it was the first time she's felt hopeful?
yes, and you know, finally someone from a younger generation has come up and is offering something, not airy-fairy. I mean, you have an incredible understanding of the complexity of what's going on in Israel. This is very clearly spelled out, all the different steps that you can take in such a way that you can put it into practical implementation. I think you hit the nail on the head when you say biggest difficulty is the belief in the possibility of peace. People have given up. I just came back from Israel, talked to my nephew. He doesn't believe peace is possible in his lifetime. So listening to you, really, truly, it's the first time that I have felt that it could be possible, that here's something come along. And thank you very much. I mean, you seem just brilliant to me. And innovative and creative, and just have such a grasp on the blocks to peace, you know, the orthodoxy, the education of the young people, that has to be put into place, the security aspect. But I think the belief thing is a primary one.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What I would say, what's very important
She's
about...
not your mother, right?
No. My mum, like, they always say that you can't be an expert within 100 miles of your house. My family now all live in Israel, so they think, as I think David did, that I'm more naive than other people. But that's it. No, what I would say though, this is really important. This is not a replacement for a political process. And this, if there's one message you take away from my entire speech, is this. Every time you've tried to replace the political process with something else, you destroy that thing. What do I mean by that? In 1993 till 2004, there were marvelous organizations that were doing people-to-people dialogue that brought Israelis and Palestinians together, children's camps, other things, amazing stuff. Today, it's nearly impossible to do that. The reason being that the Palestinians said this hasn't changed our situation. So something that is such a necessary factor for a two-state solution, for peace, about having that human-to-human interaction, has become toxified amongst the Palestinians because it didn't deliver. In 2006, with Fayad, we had the start of the economic development concept, and the United States poured hundreds of millions, not quite billions, but hundreds of millions of dollars into generating economic development specifically located on Jenin. But that too did not generate an end to the occupation, and because of that, it's now being seen as a replacement. If this work takes place in a vacuum, it fails. It has to be a complement to the political process alongside it, and that's one of our big challenges. Ira, and then we'll jump to the back.
What can we do now?
So, marvellous. Well, alright, so two things. One, I put literature on the front about One Voice. Please support us. This, you know, I don't know if it's polite etiquette to talk about we're at someone else's event, but see there, you can have a look, you can support us both financially, personally, politically, the information's there, come up and speak to us. It's really important. You know, we talk about resource allocation, our annual budget's around 1.6 million at the moment, we're trying to grow it. Just to give you an example, Aaron Moskovitz has given, over the past 30 years, $82 million to Atara Karnim, which is the sort of intellectual headquarters of the settler movement. It's like fighting fire with a squirty gun. So, so one of the challenges is we're under resourced, and I think secondly, and this is really important, it's cool that I'm young and that I run around and do this stuff, but the people who are most respected in the Jewish communities in the States are people of your generation at this point, because you are representatives of the Jewish community. So if this is the sort of work you like to see, support it, talk to your representatives, this is the sort of work that you should try to find and support. And I'm always happy, move back on the slides. All of my contacts are up here, both on Twitter, and if you tweet, please do follow me. On my email, just get in touch, I'll find ways to link you in. Be it that you're interested in economic development, children, sports, politics, settlers, Jerusalem, whatever you're interested in, I'll find you a project. Lady all the way back.
Yeah, this is really good. It's the underpinning to the political process. You have mentioned in a very succinct way what the threads are that are interconnected and convoluted and make comprehension very difficult. And you've put them in a way that you've just combed them out. You want this piece, this piece, this piece. You can bring that weave together. This is very beautiful. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yeah?
So this is wonderful, and of course we also need a political process to mirror the civil society building process. But peace can't be made in a vacuum in Israel-Palestine either, and it needs to also be complemented by some kind of regional process. So how are you engaging regional actors, and how does that work?
Perfect. Okay, so many of you have heard of the two-state solution. How many of you have heard of the 53-state solution? So the 53-state solution was generated it's something that David, which was generated, the phrase actually came from David Miliband, who is now just taken over as the President and CEO of the International Rescue Committee, but was the former Foreign Minister of the UK. And so the Arab Peace Initiative, which was a concept that was generated in 2002, just after 9/11 by the Saudis, was a document signed by all Arab nations that says that if Israel does X, Y, and Z, then it will enjoy full normalization in the Arab world. Now, there have been challenges to the Arab Peace Initiative, Syria disintegrating, the rise of Hamas and Hezbollah. But interestingly, just 2 months ago in Doha, the entire Arab League, re-endorsed it. So, what's been very interesting is that Secretary Kerry has been using the Arab Peace Initiative as his core document moving forward on the two-state solution. And of course, there needs to be a regional aspect to this, because Israelis want to have actual security, and that includes the regional, and B, the Palestinians need political cover if they're going to make compromises, and that cover can only come from the Arab states that surround them. What I would say that's very interesting that we're trying to ask for is trying to get the Arab states to make commitments along the way. So, they're not going to normalize relationships with Israel today. Make a commitment during the process. Don't make it an all or nothing. Try and delineate that peace dividend. And that's one of the things we're trying to do. I think that I'm going to grow on your question. While civil society stuff is great, if you can't get the political process momentum, what are you playing at? I think one of the challenges is we were very active in the Israeli elections. We seeded videos. We got 600,000 views. We tried to help Yair Lapid get elected, only to find Yair Lapid get into bed with Naftali Bennett, who's the head of the settler community. And there's a real challenge today that the number one issue in the Israeli election was Eiffel Kesef, where is the money? Where's the money that we're doing so well with this startup nation that the cost of living is going through the roof, that 2 professionals can't afford an apartment in Tel Aviv and live hand to mouth every month? And so the answer is the money's in 2 places. The money's with the ultra-Orthodox subsidies, and it's in the settlements. But it's so hard to deal with both at the same time, and ultra-Orthodox look far more foreign than the settler looks foreign, that the ultra-Orthodox have been prioritised at dealing with that issue first. But through its prioritisation, it's allowed the settlement community to take over key government industries, housing, economics and finance, the chairman of the Knesset Finance Committee, diaspora affairs, religious affairs, and this allows them to continue to build towards a one-state solution. So we are desperately trying to create wedges between Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, and that's what we're doing. That, if I'm honest, all this cool stuff is great, but we really need to also do that work, and that's why that's what we're focused on in Israel. Yes?
With Prime Minister Fayyad's resignation, see that as a step towards or away from any ability to negotiate in your future?
I'll tell you what our Palestinian office said, because it was Prime Minister Fayyad is definitely a loss, without a doubt. He was someone who stood apart from Hamas and Fatah and truly cared about the future of Palestine outside of a political concept. But I want to be really clear. Fayyadism was about institution building. So if the institutions can't survive one person, he fundamentally failed. Because if it can't survive him, I think what's very important is what comes next. If it's a unity government between Hamas and Fatah that accepts the two-state solution, which I don't foresee because I don't see Hamas moving at this point, but if it is, there's stuff to do and there's ways to go. If it's a unity government that doesn't have that commitment, there's a lot of serious trouble. If, however, there isn't a unity government, there are different candidates being floated, all of which are pretty much within the same spirit of Fayyad, even if they don't have the same confidence of the international community. I think the key would be giving whoever his successor is, as long as they believe in a two-state solution and real negotiations, time to prove themselves, so that the international community doesn't just pull the carpet out. And we also have to see what Salman Fayyad does afterwards. Is he going to go back to Texas? Is he going to stay in Palestine? Is he going to run a fund? What's he going to do? But he is definitely a fundamental part of the peace camp within Palestine. And also about how you be a proud nationalistic Palestinian today and build the future of Palestine. Yes?
Could you talk a little bit more about One Voice?
Sure.
And where does your funding come from?
Yes.
And is it primarily from Israel or from the States?
So One Voice was founded in 2002. We've got offices in Ramallah, Tel Aviv, Gaza, and offices in New York and London. We're funded by private individuals, trusts, and foundations. The vast majority of our money comes from abroad, but we've never accepted government money from any government. We exist abroad to do most of our development work, to do strategic partnerships, and we bring pairs of Israeli and Palestinians around to US campuses and communities, and in Europe affected by the conflict. So we were just actually in UC Irvine with the Olive Tree Initiative last week. We were in the Islamic Center and other parts. We have donors from the Palestinian community and from the Israeli community. Our board, if you look on our website, features entertainment, political figures from across the political spectrum in both communities. So we have Israelis, we have Palestinians, we have Americans. Dennis Ross, Martin Indyk, Stu Eisenstadt. There's one more. Are all on our board. And so we sort of work with all those sort of different people. We have, for the past 10 years, been building the human infrastructure for the two-state solution. And we continue to do so. We're the second largest youth movement in the occupied Palestinian territories, and we are a very active, prominent part of the peace camp within Israel. I'd say that our reputation in Israel is less than it is in Palestine at the moment. We operate off campuses in Israel, all 8 of the major campuses. But we're far more focused at the moment about how do you get 60 fingers to go up in the Knesset than we are about building a grassroots movement in Israel at this point. In Palestine, it's the reverse. We're far more focused about building a grassroots movement just because of the differences in each society. Yes?
Just as they're floating thousands of rockets into Israel, how about if you float millions of your documents in their language over their territory? Because they have to get information from somewhere. And the populations that are interviewed and they're I don't know if that view is always theirs. It's what they hear with their communication.
I think that's very true, and I would say that it's not often heard in the media, but there is a huge discussion in Palestinian society, both in Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem, about different opportunities, issues, different parts. But what I said before about, because there's been no process moving forward for them from how they perceive it, because they've only in their images, and if you put yourself in their shoes, have only seen an encroachment on their land, it's really hard to get people enthused about doing things. And that's really hard. That's not an excuse for rockets. And I think that what you're seeing, what was very interesting, there was a poll last month that showed that support for violent resistance is at an all-time low in the Palestinian Authority. It's around 30% now. Support for non-violent resistance is around 67 to 70%. So you've seen a complete change in trajectory. And just one thing, it's a very interesting factor about Five Broken Camels, which was one of the 2 Israeli films that was nominated. A lot of people talk about the effect that film had in Israel and about Israel's image. That's not the actual important story. The film was shown on Israeli Channel 2, and in Israeli jails you can watch TV. And a lot of the convicted terrorists watch this, and in general, non-violent resistance was always seen as, I'm using Palestinian terminology, it was seen as like a female thing. It wasn't what the men did. But seeing the success of fight-breaking cameras and the ability that Budris got to move the wall and other parts is actually influencing convicted terrorists about what is the correct way about moving forward. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that therefore everything's great and happy. But what's been interesting is that the non-violent resistance movement, through actually the focus on it, is having an impact in a very interesting way. Did anyone else have a question before we go out? Okay.
We've heard a lot of statistics about surveys and support and blah, blah, blah. Yet in the elections, and maybe I'm taking the thunder away from your afternoon session, but in the elections, they don't seem to reflect so we say one thing and do something else, it seems. Can you address that?
What issue do you care most about in American politics? What issue do you care most about in American politics?
Many.
Just pick one.
Hunger.
Hunger. Is the hunger the only thing you elect for your Knesset, for your local or Senate representative, or your presidential candidate? The challenge in Israel is that there are multiple issues going on, and because there's been peace and calm, peace and justice isn't something that's, peace and security hasn't been prioritized. It's always at the back of people's minds. And just like you have in America the 9/11 test, when you're looking for a president, so they have a security test, they don't want someone who's untested at the top, but it's not the number one priority at the moment. And there's a challenge there because there's an urgency. So one of the things we're doing is trying to demonstrate that urgency. There hasn't been an election in the Palestinian Authority since 2006, so we'll see how the votes come out. But in the polling, we've got to swing back to Fatah now, but it could swing both ways. It all depends on corruption and valence politics, like any sort of democracy. But that's why I think you don't see it played out.
Well, what about on the Israeli side?
That's on the Israeli side. On the Israeli side, there's so many different issues that they care about, and economics and all the other parts, and women's liberation and the ultra-Orthodox and everything else. There's no single party that can, go. Last question, just at the back.
I was wondering whether the reverse could be true of what you're doing or planning or thinking of for Negev or Galilee in terms of the future development and housing. In the meantime, there are people, Arabs and Jews, living on the West Bank in the areas that you're thinking of moving.
Yeah.
Has there been any movement or thought about all the wonderful industry, the tech industry and all the other industry that's going on in Tel Aviv, say, of having branches right now in that part, so that you're creating a work and educating people for that future workforce?
I think it's vital. It's not just about housing, it's about moving yourself as an individual. As you guys know, if you can't commute to your job, you can't move. I think that the key thing is that this has to be an inclusive concept. At the moment, one of the challenges, if business, if I understood your question, moves to some of the outlying settlement communities, it will incentivize people to stay at the moment. The key is that you need to incentivize by creating job infrastructure in the places that you need them to move to. Does that make sense? Did I not understand?
What I meant was, they have neighbors where they are living.
Yes.
In the West Bank.
Yes.
Not necessarily right where they're housed.
Yes.
There are Arabs there.
Yeah.
What about those that, like, I was reading Soda Stream.
Yes.
He put a plant
In
one
Mane
time.
Adumim.
Right. If they did more of that, had more proximity
I understand.
for them, that's.
Okay, I understand. Yes, economic development in this concept is very important. And we've got this whole economic development in Area C and other in social entrepreneurship. But it has to go, what I'd say is, it's really important, but it has to go alongside a political process. If you just develop in the area and sort of give great job opportunities, but never talk about how they're going to get their own state, or have, if you're going to believe in one state, equal rights within Israel, it doesn't work. Because both Intifada and, I'm just going to finish off now. So the end of that is, both Intifadas broke out at a time of heightened economic prosperity within the Palestinian territories. So it's something just to think about. Economic development does not help the security of Israel. I know that sounds weird. Of course it will eventually, but it alone won't help. The second thing, and here's the last thing, is that if this is stuff that you've been interested in, if this is stuff you want to get involved in, pick up, there's documentation there about One Voice. I'll leave some business cards. Come find me at lunch or in the speaker section afterwards. I'll be happy to speak to any of you. Thank you very much.